All right, welcome to the Transfer Talks podcast. It's your co-host Ashmit with co-host Neil, and we have a super special guest today, Connor, who's a transfer to Princeton, number one college in America. So
Wow.
super
As of
inspiring,
today,
special.
as
As of
of
today,
today,
I
14th in a row.
I
hey,
number one forever on my list.
uh,
Yeah.
hey, Ashmit, do you ever expect we're gonna get a Princeton kid?
No, no.
Nah,
It's always the first for everything. But yeah,
yeah.
anyways, let's get it
So
started.
hoping he learns. All right, awesome. So yeah, we love to start these interviews or like conversations off by basically allowing like the guest to sort of just speak on your your transfer story from like your perspective. So um where were you at? Like why did you go to community college? What do you do? And then how did you get to where you are right now?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm a big advocate in spreading my story as well as just the right information. I feel like in the transfer realm, there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of people that are talking as though they have authority and don't actually have any idea what they're talking about. And so I always like to kind of set the record straight on how I did it and how I've heard others do it. So I really appreciate what y'all are doing and just really believe in it.
Thank
I
you.
actually I'm on the board of a nonprofit that does mentoring for transfers in my state of Arkansas, called Apply Arkansas, which we just launched this year. So I'm definitely a big advocate for all of this. Anyways, to get to my story, basically, I don't really have the traditional story as you'll find out. Every non-traditional person that does this kind of like high level transferring to a top college, a lot of us have just all kinds of stories, whether that's military background or career background. Mine comes from more the career side. So essentially, I went to high school in South Carolina. I transferred to a boarding school in Michigan called Interlochen Arts Academy, where I studied filmmaking for 2 years. If everyone that's in like the arts world is pretty familiar with Interlochen, it's an awesome school, very big in music and like theater, stuff like that. But they have a film program, and my goal was always to go to USC Film School in California. That was always my dream school growing up. Went to Interlochen, did it for 2 years, and then I got into USC for business and film. I was gonna go to Marshall Business School with the film minor back in 2015, but they deferred me for a year because I was a spring admit, and I wanted to start on time with this program, with this film business joint program. So I deferred, and I had this built-in gap year. And while in my gap year, my father, who had, supported me going to boarding school and was going to help support me going to USC, basically called me and said, "Hey, some things have changed. You're on your own figuring out college." And I said, "Okay, I'll think about this." And essentially, I decided to not go to USC and to not look into taking the loans out, and just to kind of bet on myself and my own career. So up to that point, I have been working professionally as a filmmaker and videographer for about 3 or 4 years. I had shot, commercials, videos for nonprofits. I had done marketing, like social media advertising, things like that. So I felt like, I have enough skill set here, from my knowledge at Interlochen as well as my career so far, that I could take that and just kind of figure things out. So so that was 2016. From then till 2020, I worked full time as a videographer. I worked for a church for a period of time doing content creation. I worked for a lot of nonprofits. I did some like documentary work, some wedding films, things like that. And eventually that wound up leading me to a contract offer with a smaller ABC station based out of Arkansas, doing commercial work for them. I signed that deal. I had a 2-year deal with them. This is 2020. This is right when COVID started, and college was not on the brain at all. I just felt like I'm already in my career. I'm doing my thing. I don't need college. That's not my thing. But I always felt like if I wanted to go to California, going to college would be the best way to like justify the move. So during the pandemic, I went back to community college. I my college, so I was in Arkansas at the time. This was Northwest Arkansas Community College. Go Eagles! Went there during COVID, so it was fully online. And the goal at that point was just to maybe look at like CSUN or like USC, one of like the LA schools, as a just an excuse to move there and finish my bachelor's. But about a year in, I had a 4.0. I was doing very well. And I just looked around and said, what schools would pay for me to go? Like, what schools could I financially make work? And I started looking into the Ivy League schools and felt like, okay, well, they have incredible financial aid. They like non-traditional transfers. Why not shoot my shot as well as other schools on top of that? So I pivoted. This is 2021. So I pivoted to focusing on like top 10 type schools and schools that really favor non-traditional students as well as community college students. Pivoted to that 21, 22. I went all in, had a harder course load. I had classes in person that year. I was working, and all of this, I was working full time, making commercials. I was also in development, pre-production, production, post-production on my longest short film to date, called Saint, which is finally going to come out this year. But I was in production on that during 2021. So I just had a crazy year, but I was all in on this and felt like, let me just put all my chips in, give my best shot and see what happens. So I applied to 8 schools, and the ones I got into Princeton, Yale, and Brown in spring of 22. Now with Yale and Brown, they have non-traditional programs. Yale has Eli Whitney, Brown has resumed undergraduate education, or RU, that are both favored towards 25 age plus. So I was 25 when I applied, so I qualified. Got into those, but Princeton was always kind of this like unicorn dream school for me. I had a mentor who was from New Jersey, who was a screenwriter, and said, you should go to Princeton, you'll love it. And he actually called it in 21. He was like, I guarantee if you apply, you'll get in and you'll be at Princeton in a year. And I was like, dude, it has like a 1% transfer rate. Like, I'll shoot my shot, but like there's no guarantees. And sure enough, I got in. It's the first person I called after I got in was my mentor and said, you were right. I did get in. So I went and toured 2 weeks later. I went toward there, Yale, Brown, and just fell in love with Princeton. I actually toured during reunions, and this was the first reunions we had back after the pandemic. So like almost like a quarter of our living alumni were there on campus. So it was just huge. And it just totally sold me. I love the community there. I love the family and just like the absolute school spirit that alumni have towards our school. Just really sold me over Yale and Brown. And then also Princeton offered, a full financial aid package, as well as you can go for all 4 years to Princeton if you transfer there. That's one of like the unique parts about our program is that you can actually like restart if you wanted to. And that was really appealing to me as someone that wasn't on like a grad school, business school, med school type timeline. And would give me more time to focus on my projects, have an extra summer, et cetera. So it just was a no-brainer for me. So in 2022, I transferred to Princeton, and it's been great. So there's probably a lot more than you want me to get into, but that's kind of like the greatest hits of the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's definitely inspiring. I agree a lot with your first take in the very beginning about misinformation. I think if you're not familiar, there's a Reddit server called Transfer Top 25. Yeah, it's probably the worst thing to ever like happen. I feel like so many people there abuse it and sort of act like how you say, like they act like they've already transferred when they're still in the process. So it really dilutes the kind of quality. I think the idea behind it's good, but I don't know, it's just turned into some crazy like being. But yeah, no, 100%. I wanted to like kind of elaborate a little bit on your application process, right? So
Sure.
when you decided to pivot, you told me you were thinking about CSUs like USC. Then you decided to pivot to apply to these 8 really good schools. So did you do any research? Did major or your major like I know you wanted to do film studies, or so did that have anything to do with the school you chose, or was it really just like prestige?
Well, for me, like I was saying, it really was a financial thing. It was, for someone like me who is a trade-based person with like filmmaking, video editing, shooting, like I'm in those arts and those spaces, and those are not tied to a degree necessarily. Obviously the degree helps, but it wasn't like an end all be all. Like I needed to have like a degree to go into like med school or things like law school, things like that. So for me, it was all about what schools would financially support me the most and would give me the most open doors. So that was like the first thing. And then when I started building my list out, I just look. I think I had about 25 schools at first, like a big spreadsheet. I'll say with Red, I'll say that with transfer to top 20 to top transfer to top 25, it's a great starting point just for like getting a sense of the landscape and kind of what you're up against. But certainly in terms of like specific information, you really have to go to the actual data. You have to actually go look at CDS, look common data set, look at, people that have actually been admitted. How did they pull it off? Things like that. So I started with a big spreadsheet and then just kind of slowly whittled it down in terms of, what were the requirements, what kind of schools were more friendly to people like me. So schools like Duke are more friendly to like lateral transfers, whereas like Princeton is looking specifically for, non-traditional people. So I tried to limit my applications to just schools that like I really wanted to go to and made sense for me. It's kind of like that two-way street mentality of building an application that is appealing to the school, but also makes you like, oh wow, we really want someone like this in our class, in our transfer group. So that kind of whittled it down to like these 8 schools. I ended up applying to USC, like schools like Georgetown, like Stanford was on there. So schools that just had good financial aid, excellent open doors, and would give me the main thing in terms of education was like a liberal arts education. I applied as an economics major and then eventually pivoted. I'm now looking at religion at Princeton, which is very in line with my personal film interests and my writing. But at a school like Princeton, you don't have to study economics necessarily to go into business, whereas at other schools you might have to. So much of that decision to change once I got to Princeton was built around I was already there, so I didn't feel pressured to have to study like a business or economics friendly major. But yeah, it really started from having like a lot of schools and then just like through my own personal research, whittling it down.
Mhm.
Yeah, so like I go to community college and like I also meet a lot of people that are also like older and like 25 plus, and I always like to send them those like links of like Eli Whitney and those like programs that like favor people that are like a bit older. But like from your perspective, like what would you rank the importance of like each aspect of the application, like GPA, letters of rank, like ECs, essays, like everything?
Um, your why is everything. So I'm your why / your spike. So a lot of people in this realm are very familiar with the term spike. This is not first gen. This is not like underrepresented minority. This is what is your thing that makes you stand out against the other 100 people. A lot of people confuse hooks with spikes. Hooks is things you can't control necessarily. Like that's your situation, and you can play off that however you need to. Like for me, I was from Arkansas applying, so that was an underrepresented educational state. But for me, I knew I could control my spike. So for me, it was all about filmmaking. I really wanted to apply to schools that were curious about people in the arts, that also wanted to blend business or other industries. So that's why I think it makes complete sense why out of the schools I applied to, like the ones that were the most liberal arts friendly are the ones that took me because they knew that my application was friendly towards, the combination of business, writing, creativity, and that really lends itself to a liberal arts education. So if you have to go all in on your spike, you can't be afraid of leaving other interests behind. But if you can get all your application to be centered around one topic and one interest that you're amazing at, it makes it so much easier for you in the process and in the application process. I was one of the pivotal moments for me was in August of 2021. I found a Princeton transfer through a podcast, just like this one. And I reached out to him and said, can I have a half an hour of your time? We had a half an hour phone call, and he explained to me how in the room, you really want to have your application be boiled down to a few keywords, because amongst 1,000 people, if you do all the same things as everybody else, you're not going to stand out. Whereas if I can be, Southern business minded filmmaker, it's a unique combination of a lot of things that will very much stand out. And look, Princeton may have already taken a Southern transfer or a film based transfer in 2021, and they don't need me at that point in 2022. But what if they didn't take that person and they are looking for someone that fits my skill set and fits my interests? I'm exactly what they're looking for. So if you can really you're trying to make the job of the app of your admissions officer easier. So by making it easier, you're solidifying your application around a couple of key things, and giving them the easiest launch pad you can for them to sell your application in the room. And that's with those keywords that really stand out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. Like trying to like target one specific thing that you like really want to get out of a school that you're applying to. But like I'm curious, like how do you like go about getting like letters of rec, and like how would you like direct your professors to like write them?
I would ask professors that I was involved with on a lot of spectrums. So I had two professors that I was not only involved with on a class level, but also on an extracurricular level. So one of them was a guy named Dr. Evans, who I had for several political classes, but I also worked with him closely on our Model UN team at my community college. I helped plan several events with him. I helped, correspond with him on a lot of things. So he was someone that could speak properly to my entire application and kind of all my interests. I would ask them a few months in advance and just put it on their radar. I would always send notes. I would, treat it in like, I'd be incredibly gracious towards them, and then just kind of make sure along the way that they're hitting all their checkpoints. A big mistake I see a lot, especially on the subreddit, is that people they'll complain, oh, my admissions counselor or my admissions officer or my teacher didn't submit. Oh my gosh, and they'll have these like cry emojis, and I'm like, that's your fault. You had to take care of that, and you let your entire life and your future fall in the hands of a professor or a college counselor. That's on you. You have to make sure that they actually take care of those things. So that's one thing for sure, is you have to almost treat applying to a top school like a part-time job. It really has a lot of responsibility and a lot of things you have to take care of, and keeping your professors in check, making sure they hit all their checkpoints, as well as like sending midterm reports, sending like your transcripts, etc. That's all through you, you know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you need to stay on top of it, especially with those top schools. I think asking in advance, and like if you don't, and like they don't get to send it, I believe like I agree, it's with you, because you should have taken that time to go out there and like double check and be like, hey professor, hey Professor Y, can we are we good with this timeline? Are we good to go? I wanted to go back a little bit to your when you said your why is very important. I resonated a lot with that. For you, it was Southern filmmaker who was also trying to do a little bit of business, right? And
Sure.
um, it's like when you find a why, right? Um, I feel it goes a little bit more than that. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but
Yeah.
achieving depth in these fields is equally as important. I think you can create a bunch of words, but if you have no depth, no proof, no like proof in the pudding, you can't really they kind of like are a little hesitant, admissions officers. So what did you do to like show your depth in each of these fields?
That's a great follow-up question, because I actually haven't heard someone ask that really in that way, because I think a lot of people stop at the spike and then they don't give the deeper reason. So I'm glad you asked that. For me, it was all rooted in this recent streaming boom in film and television, and how it has completely devalued what a movie is. 10, 20 years ago, you can make a comedy film for 30, $40 million, put it in the box office, you make $140 million worldwide off it. That's a profit. Now that $30 million Kevin Hart film, or that, action comedy with Ryan Reynolds, that's a streaming movie. That's a Red Notice. That's a Gray Man with Ryan Gosling, and they just go and die, and they don't add value. They don't, offer any discourse. They don't add to the community. They're just there to just inflate a stock, or just to try to encourage stock, shareholders that Netflix or Disney Plus, whatever is doing better. And I just see just a total misstep in that. And a lot of my application was built around trying to understand more about why those things were happening, what the value of a film was, what the value of a television show was, and how that relates to streaming. So there was a lot of like technical things I was referencing in my essays about my interests and how I wanted to like meet more people in those realms and just try to understand it more. And so I guess the deeper why was why are movies being devalued, and what can I do as a person interested in both art and business to fix that? And that was like a big behind it. And also, the key thing there is that I wasn't able to really pursue those things in a place like Arkansas. If I was already in New York or California, maybe I could pursue those things. But because I demonstrated, like, not only do I have a pretty clear spike, a clear why, but also like a pretty clear need for transferring, that like I'm not going to get into any of those fields if I'm in Arkansas. Whereas if I'm at Princeton or Yale or Stanford, the schools that are going to be way more finance, investment banking, like stock market oriented, I can open those doors a little bit easier and earn a little more street cred if I want to, go into those fields later on in my career.
Yeah. I would, yeah. I definitely would like agree with that, like adding that depth in your like essays, so that's not just like generic, like what 100 other people would say. But like now that you're at Princeton and you've interacted with like your transfer cohort, like what percentage would you say would be like non-traditional students, and like also like traditional students like me that like went to high school, then went to community college, and then are looking to transfer?
Well, we're unique in that pretty much all of us are non-traditional. We don't really have a Rutgers transfer or like a Penn State transfer. We just don't have that. We have a couple of like student athletes that have come in from 4 years, like Auburn or UC Boulder, or UCLA. But for the most part, it is just community college transfers. Now, there's a handful of like military veterans that went to 4 years that transferred to Princeton, but they had the military background. So pretty much it's a mixture of military folks and then community college transfers that were either fresh at, like there's a few that were fresh out of high school that went to community college, like, in the area, like New Jersey, New York area, and then transferred pretty soon after. And then there's folks like myself who had a little bit of time after high school where they had a career or where they, had other things they were pursuing. But for the most part, everyone there is non-traditional.
Mhm. And so, I kind of wanted to add on to that question, right? See, me and Ashmit, we're both crafting our lists. We're about to apply in March for these privates. I have like name schools that you mentioned, like Stanford, Princeton, Brown, Columbia, and all of these schools are really good, right? But the thing, like a internal question I'm like facing is some of these schools prefer a lot of non-trads over traditional schools. And my question as is it, if you have a passion to go to the school, and should you go and apply to some of these schools that may have like lower acceptance rates, or maybe like the traditional, like I went to community college, now I'm transferring. I know a lot of these schools like military veterans or people who take gaps, but I wanted to say if it was worth like sort of just applying to these schools, if you have like a good reason, or you should kind of be like a little hesitant and kind of like, if you don't think your application is like enticing enough, you should like maybe take a year off. Because I am in my first year, so it's just a question I was asking.
If if you're at a community college, then you're okay. But if you're from a 4 year and you're trying to a school that's almost exclusively for community college transfers like Princeton, you have to act like it's like 4th and 24 and it's a Hail Mary and you're like at like the 15-yard line and trying to score a touchdown. Like it could happen. It could happen, but like it is like an absolute Hail Mary. Now, if you're at a community college, that's a little different because we do have a handful of, at least for us, we have a handful of students that are like traditional college age that went through community college and then transferred. So definitely like not out of it, but I do talk to a lot of 4 year students that want to apply to Princeton, and I'll just kind of say like, you can apply, but I would, if you're going to put money into, like, definitely don't put a lot of money or effort into it, because it's just going to be an uphill battle for you, because we just don't take people from 4 years traditionally, like, ever. So you could be the person that does that surpasses that, but you're up against the odds. Whereas schools like Harvard and Yale, while they do have lower cohort sizes with their transfers, they do take 4 year transfers every so often. Like, obviously y'all would be fools not to apply to Stanford, because they take 50 plus transfers a year. A lot of them are from California community colleges. So, you have to play the hand you're dealt. Like, for me, like, I could love Duke all I want. I could want school spirit and all the Duke stuff, but like, I'm probably not going to go to Duke out of a community college. I might from North Carolina, but as an out of state community college transfer, it's a major uphill battle for Duke. So same thing with Princeton. It's like I might love Princeton, but if I'm not in the right spot to apply there, I should be putting my energy and my effort towards schools similar to Princeton that will be more likely to take me, because you'd rather put all your chips in on those schools that you feel like you're a good fit for than like just throw the Hail Mary and like waste your time.
Yeah, no, I think I get it. I think doing the research before is important. So you mentioned Duke, and you said that they kind of like 4 years a little bit more. Where do you get?
It's
Where
like
do you think?
debate. It's like debated. It's like debated on that. I just know that is pretty commonly held amongst like the people on the subreddit, amongst people that I know that have applied to Duke. Um, I'd be less like I don't want to be like the one to say that because I don't go.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of we're going back. Like, there's like a lot of misinformation. I think it's like everyone is like
Yeah.
super on.
If you could get a Duke, I would just try to find a Duke transfer because it really is such a question mark on the subreddit and with other people, like if they really are a lateral spot or not. I would also talk to a U Chicago person because I know a handful of people at Princeton that like were, I'm not sure how much I can say, but they were like courted to apply to U Chicago ED because they do the transfer ED thing
Yeah.
there. And I have a feeling that they really want you to apply ED, and that you're going to have a major uphill battle gain into U Chicago as a transfer if you're not ED. Because I've talked to people that like veterans that have looked at U Chicago, and they're basically been told by U Chicago people, "Oh, you should apply ED." So I feel like I'm like dirty for like saying this, like because like all these like little backroom things. It's just how it happens. Even but whereas like other like Stanford has a great cohort size. I mean, and I'm sure y'all are familiar like Brown basically only takes transfers that are full pay. I mean, that's pretty like common held knowledge. Same with like Wash U. A couple other schools are kind of similar to that. But it's just those are the kind. That's why, like, to be honest, if you can really get your list narrowed down to like in like the 5 to 15 range, maybe, or I mean, even a little smaller, like you can really try to find people that went to that transferred to these schools and just ask them, like, what did you do to get in? Like, what are they looking for? I find that's pretty helpful.
Yeah, I've been messaging people all around the subreddit, so I'll definitely be getting a lot of insights on that.
Yeah.
But like, you've been advising people for like how many years now?
Well, I got it in 2022.
Okay.
And so I've Princeton is one of those ones that the only people really active on the subreddit, or at least online in general, are mostly military veterans. And like I have such good military friends at Princeton. Like I love the vet community there. A lot like my closest friends are vets, but like a vet trying to advise a non-vet on how to transfer is just a recipe for disaster. It's a totally different game. So there's one other guy I know who actually no, he's a vet. So I'm pretty sure I try to be as active as I can online because there's just not a lot of people like me that transferred to Princeton who weren't veterans who also were like men. And so that's why I try to be as active as I can, but I can't answer like every question.
And so like from your experience, like what would you say is like one thing that like people have in common that have successfully transferred to these kinds of schools?
So like a top 25 or a top five?
Like top five,
Top 10,
They
top 10, top 10.
like top 10, top five.
top 10, they know exactly why they want to be there. And
Mm,
they've clearly stated it. They're not prestige chasing, they're not chasing a title, they're not trying to go to like Deloitte over a third party group. Like they know exactly who they are and why they're applying. And if you in like everyone who I could literally name off all the Princeton transfers. The veterans also have their spikes and their whys, but like if I could literally name off all the non-veteran Princeton transfers and exactly identify why they were selected because they're just so specific with who they are and what they're good at. I always talk about like a freshman can be admitted off of potential. A transfer to a top 10 has to be admitted off of proven potential. So oftentimes you see like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford transfers have some kind of like high level research somewhere else, especially if they're STEM. They're probably published somewhere else. They probably research it like at a top school because it gives that proven potential to that admissions officer. Because like I can sit there all I want and say, oh, I want to study quantum theory or whatever. Like if I wasn't actually in a lab, if I wasn't actually trying to get things published in that space, like how can they possibly know I want to do that? Whereas someone else has done that work and has been published and has done proper research, they're going to choose that person over me every single time. So you got to find what makes you stand out and what can align with like your what you've already accomplished, which is really hard when you're like 18 years old, but like that's just what I've recognized is the consistent thing, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. I think spending a lot of time. I think for me and Ashmit, we're blessed to have like a really good counselor, and he basically said the same thing. We need to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what we want to do and what the schools like get out of it, and what we can get out of the schools, like specifically for Stanford, for Columbia, and that means just doing research, all that stuff. So, in addition to that, right, schools like want to see that you are also capable like academic like student. You're ready to take these classes. So people usually do that in terms of like demonstrate that in terms of like getting a 4.0 or getting standardized scores. So I do remember you mentioned you had a 4.0. Did you take any tests as well to kind of prove that you
I,
were ready for it? Or
it goes back to my point about where you're from and your situation. I was in Arkansas, which we had never had an Ivy transfer out of my community college, so I felt pretty like I felt it would be important to go like validate my 4.0. So I went and redid my ACT. I took it 3 times. I got a 33 with a super of 34. I put a lot of work into that because I felt that that was going to be valuable in like validating my 4.0. But again, if you're at California or Texas or New York or even Florida, like a lot of these like big community college schools, like you may not need that other ACT or SAT score to prove yourself. Now that like Stanford, MIT, Harvard, I think are like requiring test scores, you may have to do that now for transfer. When I applied, none of them required it. Even MIT when I applied because of COVID. So I was very fortunate, but I still felt that if I had a good enough score, it would make me stand out and would confirm my 4.0. Also, this is like not based on data, but I get a sense of it across the board. Go get an A in at least calculus one. I think having calc one on your transcript with an A next to it is very, very valuable. I've kind of heard from other admissions officers that like that is kind of like a major green flag is having the A in calculus one, because you can get A's in humanities classes and writing classes and like these like basic intro science classes, but an A in calc one is the most consistent across the board class. You can't really mess with it. It is what it is. So I get an A in calc one. Okay, this person could probably hang. And then obviously more than that's great. Like if you like calc two, diffie q, etc. But that A in calc one, I think, is incredibly underrated as a top 10 transfer applicant.
mm,
Mm. Yeah, I guess we're like about to run out of time, but like one final question is like after you graduate from Princeton, what are your plans for the future? And like how do you plan to leverage Princeton to do that if you can do that?
Yeah, I just want to shoot movies. I've made film for 10 years. I will continue to do so. My goal at Princeton is to use as much money as I possibly can from that school to make a film a year. I've already shot a few films. Actually, I think I've produced four. I've directed a few myself. I'll do my junior film, my senior film, and just use all the money I possibly can to shoot some really excellent short films that I feel really confident about, as we just saw with Wesley Lang, who dropped out of Harvard to go shoot a film for Darren Aronofsky at Sony. Clearly, people are after these Ivy League people in the film space. Damien Chazelle, his parents are teachers at Princeton. He went to Harvard. So for me, I feel confident about shooting my films at Princeton, using their money, using their resources, using their professors to make good projects, and then just using that as a springboard. And if that doesn't pan out or it's a longer road towards that, I'm already doing creative directing for a startup right now. I do marketing and video production for all kinds of third parties and companies and things. So it'll be somewhere in that video like creation space, but preferably in narrative film.
If you need an extra, just hit me up. Hit me up.
yeah, I'm sure
You
we can
guys
be a
gotta
stunt
get you guys
double.
gotta get Zoom Pro.
Yeah, I think we gotta start investing in ourselves now.
Yeah,
You know
you
what I'm
gotta
saying? Like,
invest, man.
yeah. But yeah, I 100% agree. I think going to these top schools, I think the number one blessing is that you have freedom. Essentially, you can basically pursue anything, and the name of the school can give you a strong grounding in that field. But yeah, thank you so much, Connor. It's our first Ivy
Uh,
League, first like top school,
Oh,
or super
really?
super top. Yeah, we've
You should
always
be
had
able
like
to.
we
You should
actually
be able.
no, we had MIT. So
Yeah.
MIT is tough, man. MIT is a really weird one.
I even got
yeah,
into my CC, so even
yeah,
better.
we'll see.
Yeah.
You
So
gotta get. I know a couple people at Princeton that turned down Harvard offers. Because you probably need Harvard. That's the one that'll get the most clicks. So you probably need a Harvard person. I didn't apply to Harvard. That's like my one regret in my application cycles. I didn't apply. But maybe I would have gotten in.
Mhm,
But
we'll
yeah,
see.
it's fun. But yeah, best of luck in all the podcasting stuff. And yeah, hit me up if y'all ever have any questions.
Yeah, for sure.
You gotta apply to Stanford. Stanford's your play, man. You gotta just
Stanford's our number one. So
Stanford, Berkeley, LA, San Diego is like a
San Diego's
three
good too.
target, you know.
yeah,
For
I
sure, for
just submitted
sure.
my
Apply to
tactical.
the Ivies, man. Apply to Columbia. Apply to Penn. Apply. Look at Brown if y'all are full
Bro,
pay. Look at
Princeton.
Princeton. You're our community college, so Princeton's not out of reach for y'all. Definitely not. You just got to have like
The
a
spike.
very clear spike. I don't know what it is, but you gotta stand
We
out.
gotta we gotta see the vision, man. I think that's all it comes to.
But yeah, appreciate it, guys.